G'day everyone. Today, I've got a story that I really need you to hear. So go on, pull up a chair and pour yourself a strong cuppa. My channel is all about the magic of stories. And I want us to share in the wonder of this one together. The cold, clinical smell of concrete and disinfectant stung Clara Thompson's nose. As a newly qualified vet, she was only a week into her placement at the Hawkesbury Valley Animal Shelter, and the reality of the place was a world away from her idealistic dreams. Her heart was already starting to feel heavy. In a back corner of the facility, in an isolated block, was the dog. He was an Australian cattle dog, a blue heeler, rescued during the police raids on an illegal puppy farm. Estimated age, 3 years old. His ribs stuck out painfully from his emaciated frame. His beautiful blue mottled coat, now dull and matted, was caked in filth and mud, and countless scars were etched into his skin. He looked as though he carried all the despair in the world on his skinny shoulders. "We've given him the temporary name Shadow," a staff member explained in a bored, administrative tone, but Clara was only half listening. Her eyes were fixed on the dog, curled into a tight ball at the back of the steel cage. While the other rescued dogs barked and snarled, trying to seem threatening, Shadow made no sound at all, pressing himself against the wall as if trying to dissolve into the darkness. When a human came near, Clara could see his powerful body tremble uncontrollably. His eyes held no light, only a deep, profound emptiness. "That's awful," Clara whispered, but her voice was lost in the cacophony of barking. This dog's spirit, she thought, might already be broken beyond repair. Feeling a chill creep into her fingertips, she stood frozen to the spot. That night, Clara was working late, catching up on paperwork long after everyone else had gone home. The clock ticked past 10 p.m. The shelter was eerily silent until a loud clang of metal, followed by a man's low growl, echoed through the building. "Oi, how long are you gonna carry on like that? Useless mutt." The voice belonged to Shane Bullock, a veteran staff member. Clara remembered seeing his condescending, bullish attitude with the other staff during the day, and she frowned. It wasn't curiosity that made her get up, it was a cold knot of dread forming in her stomach. Tiptoeing, Clara followed the voice towards the isolation block. Peeking around the corner of the dim corridor, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Shane was standing in front of Shadow's cage. He roughly slid a bowl of food across the concrete floor. Shadow scrambled further back, his eyes wide with terror. "Still won't eat, eh, you stupid dog?" Shane spat, not even trying to hide his frustration. He pulled out a set of keys and violently unlocked the cage door. Stepping inside, he drew back his steel-capped work boot and mercilessly kicked Shadow hard in the ribs. A choked, muffled sound, somewhere between a yelp and a whimper, escaped the dog. His body slammed against the wall, but he still tried to curl up even smaller, to make himself disappear. Shane didn't stop. A second kick, then a third, landed with sickening, dull thuds. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. She couldn't breathe. Her body was paralyzed, as if bound by invisible ropes. This wasn't discipline, this was just one-sided violence. A disgusting display of power against a helpless creature. "Stop," she tried to shout. But at that moment, Shane froze and turned his head, looking straight back down the corridor. In this spot, a blind angle for the security cameras. He clearly never expected to be seen. For a split second, surprise and panic flashed across his face, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, menacing glare. "Well, look who it is, Dr. Thompson. What are you doing here so late, love?" he said, as if nothing had happened. At his feet, Shadow was panting for breath, shaking uncontrollably. Clara's own body was trembling with rage. Words failed her. All she could do was glare at the man before her. Shane slowly stepped out of the cage, locked the door, and then began walking towards her, one step at a time. The look in his eyes was a clear threat. "This one's a biter," he said, his voice dropping to a low snarl. "Tried to have a go at me when I fed him. Just teaching it a bit of a lesson. That's all." A lie. The dog hadn't shown a hint of aggression. He was just frozen with fear. Before Clara could say anything, Shane leaned in close, his voice a poisonous whisper in her ear. "You didn't see anything, right, mate?" The next morning, Clara's heart felt like a lead weight. She hadn't slept. Shane's cruel voice and Shadow's choked whimpers played over and over in her mind. Her mind made up, she went straight to the office of Greg Davies, the shelter director. As soon as she arrived, Davies was a man known for his bureaucratic, play-it-safe attitude, having run the shelter for over a decade. "Mr. Davies, I need to report something that happened last night." Clara didn't bother waiting for an invitation, stepping straight into his office. Davies looked up from a mountain of paperwork, not bothering to hide his annoyance. Clara ignored it and, in a voice that shook but was filled with conviction, She recounted every detail of what she had witnessed, Shane Bullock kicking and abusing Shadow, and the threat he had made to her. Davies steepled his fingers and listened without expression. He occasionally made a show of jotting down a note, but his eyes were empty of any real concern. When Clara finished, he let out a long, weary sigh. "Dr. Thompson, that's a very serious accusation." He leaned back in his chair. "But, do you have any proof? Shane has been with us for 5 years. He's a seasoned professional. From his perspective, he was probably just disciplining a difficult and aggressive animal. Just like he said. That wasn't discipline. It was torture. What about the security cameras?" Davies cut her off smoothly. About that. The camera in the ISO block was damaged in that big storm last week. We're waiting on a technician to come out and fix it. Terrible timing, really." Clara was speechless. Could it really be a coincidence? No, this wasn't a coincidence. It was a deliberate, convenient excuse. This whole organization was rotten to the core. She felt the color drain from her face. "So what happens to Shadow now? If he's left with Shane, he'll be killed." "Calm down, Doctor," Davies said in a placating tone. "The behavioral assessment team has already made a determination on that matter. The cattle dog has been deemed non-rehabilitatable due to extreme fear, aggression, and human aversion. That's the final verdict." "Whose assessment?" Clara's voice rose in anger. "Don't tell me it was Shane Bullock's. The man who's been abusing him." Davies shifted uncomfortably in his seat and started shuffling papers on his desk. His reaction said it all. The key assessor was, without a doubt, Shane himself. In this shelter, his word was law. "Dr. Thompson, I appreciate your passion for the animals. But we are dealing with a limited budget and staff. Handling over 1,000 animals a year. Sometimes, tough decisions have to be made." Just then, Davies picked up a single sheet of paper and placed it in front of Clara. Printed in cold block letters were the words: "Euthanasia Order, Case Number 2201A28, alias, Shadow." A single piece of paper, delivering a merciless death sentence. Clara gasped. The scheduled date for the procedure was tomorrow, 10 a.m. There wasn't even 48 hours left. "This dog is too dangerous," Davies said, his voice flat. "We can't risk the safety of our staff any further. The decision is final." His words were like a brick wall. Frustration and helplessness washed over her, making the world go dark for a moment. If she backed down now, Shadow would die. Worse, Shane's abuse would continue, and there would be more silent victims. Silence was the same as being an accomplice. Clara bit her lip, hard, fighting back the tears that threatened to fall. She couldn't cry now. She couldn't give up now. She lifted her head and stared directly into Greg Davies's eyes. "Sir, please, reconsider." But Davies just gave a cold, dismissive shake of his head. The light streaming in from the window behind him felt painfully bright. A light that would never reach Shadow, trembling in the darkness of his cage. The situation was hopeless. The organization was a fortress. And the director's decision was absolute. Clara left the office, stumbling down the hallway. In her head, a countdown to Shadow's death had begun. 47 hours, 59 minutes, 58, 57. The relentless ticking merged with the frantic beat of her own heart. Could she just give up? No, no way. She remembered the oath she took the day she became a vet. As long as there was a life she could save, she would never give up. Clara shut her eyes tightly for a moment, then turned on her heel and knocked on the director's door again. Facing a clearly irritated Davies, she bowed her head deeply. "I have a request. Can I please apply to be a temporary foster carer for Shadow? I'd like to use the foster to adopt program." The foster program was a volunteer system where animals were placed in temporary homes to help them socialize. For a vet on staff to apply was highly unusual, but it was the only option she could think of. Davies's eyebrows shot up. "Are you serious, Dr. Thompson? I've told you repeatedly, that dog is dangerous. What happens if you get injured? It would be a massive liability issue. I will take full responsibility. I'll sign a waiver, whatever you need." Clara pressed on. "Please, just give him one more chance. If he dies now, he'll die believing all humans are monsters. We can't let that happen. It's not right." Something in Clara's eyes, an unwavering light of determination, seemed to give Davies a moment's pause. He tapped his fingers on the desk for a while, thinking. Finally, he sighed, as if it was all too much trouble. "All right, but on one condition," he said. "You have 2 weeks. If, by the end of that period, an independent expert sees no significant improvement, the order will be carried out as scheduled. Understood?" 2 weeks. It was an impossibly short amount of time to heal the mental scars from years of trauma. But she had to take it. It was better than 0. "Yes, I accept the condition, Clara replied, her voice trembling. It was like a single, thin spider's thread dangling over a pit of fire. It was her only way out. After quickly filling out the necessary paperwork, Clara returned to her desk. A young staff member, Chloe Jenkins, nervously approached her. Chloe was a sweet, quiet girl who was always intimidated by Shane Bullock's aggressive demeanor. "Dr. Thompson, I heard about what you're doing for Shadow. You're really taking him?" Chloe whispered, glancing around nervously. In her hand, she clutched a folded piece of paper. "Be careful, please," she murmured. "Shane, you don't want to get on his bad side. You don't know what he's capable of." "Thanks, Chloe, but I couldn't just leave him." As Clara said this, Chloe seemed to make a decision. She quickly slipped the crumpled note into Clara's hand. It was a piece of paper with hastily scrawled dates, names of dogs, and words like injury and fear. "It's not just Shadow," Chloe whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "There have been so many others. I was too scared to say anything. But then I saw you." She couldn't finish, biting her lip to stop from crying. She, too, had been suffering alone inside this rotten system. This note was her small, but life-threatening, act of resistance. "Chloe, thank you, I'll take care of this," Clara said, gripping the note tightly. This wasn't just a fight to save one dog anymore. This was a fight against the deep, dark corruption that festered within the shelter itself. She steeled herself, a new resolve hardening in her chest. That afternoon, Clara prepared to take Shadow from the shelter. As she approached his cage, he tensed up even more than the day before, his fear on full display. Clara didn't force it. She opened the cage door and then sat quietly a short distance away. "Hey, Shadow, let's go home together," she said softly. "No one is going to hurt you anymore. My place is safe." She repeated these words over and over. It took a long time, but eventually, her patient calls got a small reaction. On trembling legs, he took one slow step, then another, out of the cage. Even clipping a lead on him would be terrifying right now. Clara took off her jacket, gently wrapped it around Shadow's body, and lifted his surprisingly heavy frame into her arms. The weight of him felt real, tangible. It was the weight of the responsibility she was now carrying. At the shelter exit, Shane Bullock was standing there, arms crossed. He watched Clara and the dog in her arms with a contemptuous sneer. "Good luck with that, Doc," he said, practically spitting the words. "Don't worry, I'll put it out of its misery for you in 2 weeks." His words didn't discourage her. They lit a new fire of defiance in her heart. "I will never let that happen," she thought. "I will not let this dog's future be decided by a monster like you." Clara's apartment was a sunny, one-bedroom unit on the second floor. It was far from an ideal environment for a large, active dog like a cattle dog. There was no yard, and their walks would be through the concrete jungle of the suburbs. But this place had something more important than anything else. It was a sanctuary. A place completely free of violence and fear. Just getting Shadow into the car had been an ordeal. He'd frozen solid in the car park, refusing to move. In the end, Clara had to carry his almost 30-kilogram body all the way from the car park up to her second-floor apartment. When they reached the front door, Shadow froze again, like a statue. The only sound in the quiet apartment was the nervous click-clack of his claws on the timber floorboards. "It's okay, Shadow. This is your new home. No one will ever hurt you here." Clara repeated the words for what felt like the 100th time that day. Her voice soft like a lullaby. She didn't try to force him to move. She gently placed him down on the floor just inside the doorway. Then she went and sat in the middle of the living room, patiently waiting for him to move on his own terms. Several hours must have passed. Finally, hugging the wall, Shadow began to move cautiously. He eventually found his way to a single spot, the bathroom. He squeezed his body into the narrow, dark gap between the toilet and the bathtub, and there he became completely still. It was as if this was his final, safe fortress. Clara couldn't believe such a large dog could fit into such a tiny space. But at the same time, her heart ached for him. He wasn't looking for comfort or space. He was just looking for a place to hide, where no one could find him. For the first 3 days, a fragile, unspoken truce existed between them. Shadow would only sneak out of the bathroom when Clara wasn't in the room, quickly eating the food and drinking the water she left out. Going for a walk was out of the question. He would relieve himself on the puppy pads she'd laid out, always making sure no one was watching. Everyday sounds were triggers for his terror. The hum of the fridge, the footsteps of the upstairs neighbor, the distant wail of an ambulance siren. Each noise made him flinch and retreat further into the darkness of the bathroom. Clara kept a detailed log of everything. How much he ate, the time and condition of his waist. What sounds triggered a stress response? And amidst the deep-seated fear, she noted the rare, fleeting flickers of curiosity. As a vet, she had experience with traumatized animals. But Shadow's case was more severe than any she had ever seen. He was a textbook example of every symptom of severe abuse. Clara took extreme care not to pressure him. No forced talking, no direct eye contact, no attempts to touch him. She simply existed in the same space, her entire being trying to send a single message: I will not harm you. She lowered the volume on the TV and played quiet classical music. She avoided sudden movements and spent more time sitting on the floor reading a book. But the door to his heart remained bolted shut. To him, her outstretched hand was probably no different from the hands of his past abusers. It would be a lie to say she didn't feel a sense of urgency. The 2-week time limit was a constant, heavy weight in the back of her mind. On the 4th night, a fierce, unseasonable storm hit the city. The sound of hammering rain, the flash of lightning tearing the sky apart, followed by a deep, rumbling clap of thunder that shook the whole building. In that instant, a terrifying, guttural howl came from the bathroom, a sound that seized Clara's heart. It wasn't just a bark. It was a raw scream of terror and panic. When Clara rushed to the bathroom, she found Shadow in a full-blown panic attack. He was frantically scratching at the tiled floor with his front paws, foam flying from his mouth. His eyes were wide, wild, and unfocused. At this rate, he would tear his own claws out. Shadow, it's okay, it's okay. Clara instinctively reached for him but stopped herself just in time. Touching him now would be dangerous. But she couldn't leave him like this either. What could she do? Another bolt of lightning lit up the sky. Shadow's panic reached its peak. He started thrashing, almost smashing his head against the wall. He looked like he was fighting an invisible enemy. The howling wind and lashing rain hammered against the windows as another deafening clap of thunder exploded overhead. In the bathroom, Shadow's panic had reached breaking point. He was clawing at the tiles like a mad thing, his exposed gums bleeding. His eyes had lost all reason, reflecting only pure, unadulterated terror. Shadow, calm down, it's okay. Clara's voice was drowned out by the storm and his own panicked cries. It wasn't reaching him. If she got too close, there was no telling what he might do in his fear. But if she did nothing, he would injure himself or collapse from exhaustion. Her mind raced. All her textbook knowledge felt useless in the face of this raw, extreme state of distress. She made a decision. Moving slowly, deliberately, so as not to startle him further, she backed away. Then, just outside the bathroom doorway, a few meters away from him, she quietly sat down on the cold, tiled floor. She wouldn't touch him. She wouldn't talk too much. She would just be there, to show him that in this shared threat, the storm, he was not alone. It's okay, Shadow, she said, her voice calm and steady, as much to reassure herself as him. The thunder can't hurt you. You're safe in here. She spoke with a quiet resolve, a promise that she wouldn't move from this spot until the storm passed. An hour must have passed. The storm outside showed no signs of letting up. Every time the thunder rolled, Shadow's body would jolt. But then, a change began to happen. The frantic digging at the floor started to weaken. He was still trembling, but now, in the moments between his panic, he started to glance over at Clara. Clara didn't move. She just continued to watch over him quietly. She could feel a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Her presence, which at first was a threat, was slowly starting to mean something different. Maybe he was beginning to see her not as a danger, but as another being, enduring the same storm alongside him. And then, as the storm passed its peak and the thunder began to fade into the distance, something incredible, something no one could have predicted, happened. On shaking legs, Shadow slowly, cautiously, stood up. He stood frozen for a few seconds, as if assessing her, and then, with slow, hesitant steps, he started to walk towards her. Clara held her breath. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, but she forced herself to stay perfectly still. She couldn't risk scaring him now. Shadow came all the way to her feet and stopped. He was still wary. He didn't touch her, but he had, of his own free will, broken the safe distance he had so desperately maintained. He had sought out her proximity. It was a small, fragile hand of trust, offered in the darkness. By morning, when soft light streamed through the window, the storm had completely passed. Clara hadn't slept a wink, her body stiff from sitting on the cold floor. But strangely, she didn't feel tired. A little way off, Shadow was curled up asleep. It was the first time she had seen him look peaceful since he'd arrived. An unspoken bond of new trust had been forged between them. That afternoon, Clara went to the shelter. She needed to report on Shadow's progress and discuss a future rehabilitation plan. As she walked down the corridor, Shane Bullock came walking towards her. He saw her and a twisted smile spread across his face. "So, how's the little monster, Doc? Has it bitten you yet?" he sneered. A quiet anger burned inside Clara, but she answered him calmly and firmly. "His name is Shadow, and considering what he's been through, he's doing remarkably well. He's not a monster, he's just a deeply wounded animal." "Yeah, whatever, sentimental rubbish," Shane muttered as he walked past her, throwing the words over his shoulder. 2 weeks isn't enough to fix a broken dog, love." His words no longer had any power over her, because she had seen it with her own eyes, the moment a new seed of hope had sprouted in a broken soul. That one small step, born in the heart of a storm, would lead to a great miracle. Clara was sure of it. After the night of the storm, Shadow began to change, slowly but surely. The bathroom was still his sanctuary. But now, during the day while Clara worked in the living room, he would poke his head out from the doorway to watch her. He always made sure he had a clear escape route, but it was a huge step forward. He started eating his food even when she was in the room. He showed flickers of normal dog behavior, like sniffing with interest at a pen she dropped. Moments of curiosity were beginning to break through the thick wall of his fear. Clara's records became even more detailed. She took short videos every day and noted every change in his behavior. She had online consultations with her old university mentor, Professor Evelyn Reed, a leading authority in animal behavior. Every piece of this was crucial evidence that would decide Shadow's future at the 2-week re-evaluation. "His resilience is astonishing," Professor Reed said, impressed, from the other side of the video call screen. "But Clara, please don't forget, 2 weeks is an incredibly short time to expect meaningful change in a case of such severe trauma. Can't you apply for an extension?" "I'm trying, Professor, but there's a much deeper problem at this shelter. The abuse towards Shadow is just the tip of the iceberg. There's a cover-up happening, and it goes right to the top." When Clara told her about the note from Chloe, Professor Reed's expression turned grim. "Document everything, Clara. Photos, videos, audio recordings, anything, no matter how small. People who abuse animals will not hesitate to threaten those who try to expose them. You could be putting yourself in danger." The professor's warning weighed heavily on Clara's mind, and that prophecy came true much sooner than she could have imagined. While she felt joy at Shadow's progress, the atmosphere at the shelter grew more hostile towards her each day. Shane, of course, but also a few other veteran staff members who sided with him, started to intentionally ignore her. They would misplace the files for animals under her care. A petty but frustrating form of harassment. More than once, she heard someone mutter, "Do gooder," under their breath as she passed. She was isolated. Chloe would send her worried glances, but with Shane's watchful eyes everywhere, she couldn't even speak to Clara freely. The other younger staff members clearly gave off a "don't get me involved" vibe. Clara was learning firsthand how difficult it was to stand up for what was right in such a closed, toxic environment. But she refused to give in. At the end of the day, she had Shadow waiting for her at home, a dog who was fighting his own desperate battle every single day to trust a human again. For his sake, she couldn't lose this fight. That Friday, Clara left the shelter a little earlier than usual. She planned to spend a quiet weekend with Shadow. As she walked up the stairs to her apartment, however, her heart lurched. Her front door was ajar, just by a few centimeters. She knew she had locked it. It was an old apartment without an automatic lock, but she never, ever forgot to lock the door. A cold sweat trickled down her spine. "Shadow?" she called out, her voice barely a whisper. No reply. Usually, he would hear her footsteps and she'd hear a faint sound from the bathroom as he shifted. The worst-case scenario flashed through her mind. What if Shane had? With a trembling hand, she grabbed the doorknob and slowly pushed the door open. The moment she stepped inside, she gasped. The room had been completely ransacked. Drawers were pulled out, their contents strewn across the floor. Books were torn from shelves, and the sofa cushions had been slashed open. It was a violent mess, as if someone had been desperately searching for something. "Shadow, where are you?" "Shadow!" Clara cried his name, half panicked, her voice cracked with fear. "Please be okay, please be okay." She searched the apartment frantically. The bathroom, the closet, and then, under the bed. As she peered into the darkness under the bed, two terrified eyes glowed faintly back at her. It was Shadow. He had hidden himself in a deeper, darker place than any she had created for him, his body rigid with terror. "Oh, thank God, you're safe," Clara whispered, her knees buckling with relief as she sank to the floor. But Shadow wouldn't come out from under the bed. In fact, her voice seemed to make him shrink even further back. His body was shaking even more violently than it had during the storm. The terror brought by the intruder had completely shattered the fragile trust they had just begun to build. Clara bit her lip, overwhelmed by a feeling of powerlessness. I swore I would protect him. And I let him be terrorized again. In the one place he was supposed to be safe. A wave of guilt washed over her. Looking around the trashed room, she noticed something odd. Her laptop, her wallet, nothing of monetary value had been touched. This wasn't a simple burglary. The intruder had a different motive. What were they looking for? The answer was sitting on the kitchen counter. A single, plain piece of memo paper. But when Clara saw the words scrawled on it, her blood turned to ice. Mind your own business. The dog is next. The message was brutally clear. A direct threat. She knew who was responsible. It could only be Shane Bullock. The professor's warning had become a horrifying reality. Her hands shook with a mixture of rage and fear. This wasn't just an attack on her. This was a vile threat, using Shadow's life as a hostage. Clara took a deep breath and, with a shaky hand, picked up her phone. She needed to call the police. And she needed to call Chloe. After dialing 000 and briefly explaining the situation, she called Chloe's number. After a few rings, Chloe answered, her voice small. Hello, Chloe speaking. Chloe, it's me, Clara. Is it safe to talk? Dr. Thompson, what's wrong? Your voice is shaking. Clara quickly told her what happened, the break-in, the threatening note. She heard Chloe gasp on the other end of the line. After a moment of silence, Chloe's voice came back, urgent and strained. Doctor, whatever you do, do not come to the shelter tomorrow. What do you mean? I overheard Shane talking to another staff member earlier. He was bragging about teaching that vet a lesson. And he said he knows you've been taking videos of him, of how he treats Shadow. He knows I've been keeping records. So that's what it was. Shane had broken into her apartment to find and destroy her rehabilitation records for Shadow. When he couldn't find them, he trashed the place in a fit of rage and left that note. It all made sense now. Okay, Chloe, thank you for telling me. You be careful too. After hanging up, Clara stood there, stunned. Her enemy was far more ruthless and dangerous than she had imagined. While she waited for the police to arrive, she sat on the floor, speaking quietly to the trembling dog under the bed. I'm so sorry, Shadow. I'm so sorry I let you get scared like this. I'm so sorry. Soon, the sound of sirens grew closer. 2 police officers arrived to inspect the scene, a serious-looking, middle-aged detective and a younger uniformed officer. Clara calmly explained the situation, holding nothing back, Shane's history, the abuse, and the information from Chloe's phone call. After listening to everything, the detective, whose name was Miles Hogan, folded his arms, his expression grim. This is more than just a break and enter. We're looking at intimidation, and potentially serious animal cruelty charges within the shelter. We've heard a few anonymous complaints about the Hawkesbury Valley shelter before. But nothing concrete. Detective Hogan carefully took the note from Chloe and the copies of Clara's rehabilitation records as evidence. Dr. Thompson, you are also in danger. We'll increase patrols around this apartment building starting tonight. If anything else happens, call me directly. Hogan's firm words gave Clara a small sense of relief. But the fundamental problem wasn't solved. Shane was still out there. And Shadow's heart was once again locked away in a deep, dark place. That night, long after the police had left, Clara couldn't sleep. She had no energy to clean up the trashed apartment. She just sat on the sofa, staring into the darkness. Suddenly, she felt a warm, wet touch on her foot. She looked down. Shadow had, at some point, emerged from under the bed and was gently nudging her foot with his nose. It was just for a fleeting moment. The touch of his nose on her skin was damp and warm. It was the very first time he had voluntarily initiated physical contact with a human. The object of his terror. As soon as Clara moved in surprise, he flinched and quickly retreated to a safe distance. But that brief moment of warmth had lit a tiny, definite flame in her own frozen heart. Maybe he sensed my fear, she thought, the fear of the stranger who had invaded our home, and the despair of his owner. Sitting here completely defeated, Shadow had fought through his own terror to offer her a moment of comfort. He had summoned an incredible amount of courage to do that. Tears streamed silently down her cheeks. These weren't tears of fear or frustration. They were tears of gratitude for the fragile, powerful bond that had connected them in the darkness. Thank you, Shadow, Clara whispered. She wasn't alone anymore. She had to fight, with this dog by her side. No, this dog was fighting alongside her. That single realization was a stronger shield than any threat. The next day, following Detective Hogan's advice, Clara stayed home from the shelter. But she wasn't idle. She contacted Professor Reed and told her everything that had happened. The professor used her network to connect Clara with a lawyer who specialized in animal cruelty cases. Clara spoke with the lawyer, receiving concrete advice on legal procedures and how to preserve evidence. A discreet message came through from Chloe. Shane has been in a foul mood all day. He thinks his threat worked since you didn't come in. Director Davies is pretending like he knows nothing. The darkness inside the shelter was deepening, but outside, the net to expose that darkness was slowly but surely being drawn tighter. In the afternoon, Detective Hogan stopped by the apartment to check on her. Shane Bullock hasn't been home since last night, and he was a no-show at work today. It's highly likely he's realized we're onto him and has done a runner. He's fled? It certainly looks that way, but this actually works in our favor. Hogan continued. His disappearance is as good as a confession, and our investigations have revealed that several other staff members were complicit with his actions. There's a much bigger rot at that shelter than we first thought. According to Hogan, it was suspected that Shane had been acting like a dictator within the shelter, falsely labeling animals he didn't like as aggressive to have them put down, and even being involved in illegally selling purebred animals. Director Davies hadn't just turned a blind eye, there was a possibility he was actively involved. Dr. Thompson, the records you kept and the testimony from your colleague were the first key to unlocking this massive mess. That was a truly brave thing to do. Hearing Hogan's words, Clara felt a small sense of pride. Her actions hadn't been in vain. That evening, Clara and Shadow spent a quiet time together. The apartment was still a mess, but strangely, it didn't bother her. As she sat on the floor reading, Shadow lay down a little closer to her than he had before. Watching her quietly, the emptiness in his eyes had been replaced by a gentle curiosity. No words were needed between them, just being in the same space. They drew strength from each other's presence. The bond that was born from overcoming shared fear was now stronger and more resilient than ever. On Monday morning, as Clara was steeling herself for the week ahead, she received a call from Detective Hogan. His voice was more tense than usual. Dr. Thompson, listen carefully. This morning, the City Council's Audit Department and our police force have commenced a joint raid on the Hawkesbury Valley Animal Shelter. Really? Yes, your colleague, Chloe Jenkins, decided to tell us everything. She was holding on to the definitive piece of evidence that proves Shane's abuse. Clara caught her breath. She couldn't imagine the courage it must have taken for the quiet, timid Chloe to do that. She had been fighting her own battle, all alone. But Detective, Clara voiced her concern. Shane is still missing, isn't he? And what's to stop Davies and the others from destroying evidence? On the other end of the line, Hogan's voice was calm and steady. With Shane gone, the other staff are much more willing to talk. And as for Director Davies, he's going to have a lot of explaining to do. Because the evidence Chloe provided was far more damning than any of us could have ever imagined. Early on that Monday morning, several unmarked cars and police vehicles pulled quietly into the front gate of the Hawkesbury Valley Animal Shelter. Council auditors and police officers, led by Detective Hogan, stepped out of the cars. Staff members arriving for work stopped in their tracks, taking in the serious atmosphere from a distance. Director Greg Davies was served with a search warrant. His face went pale. What is all this? Detective? Surely there's been some kind of mistake. No mistake, Director, Hogan said, his voice cold as ice. We're here to talk to you about everything you've been hiding. The catalyst for this raid was Chloe's life-risking decision. The night Clara was threatened, Chloe couldn't sleep, shaking with fear. She had agonized for hours. If she stayed silent, she might keep her job and her peace, but it would mean abandoning Clara and allowing more innocent animals to suffer. The terrified eyes of the animals and the determined face of Clara flashed through her mind. I'm done being silent. As soon as dawn broke, she had contacted Detective Hogan and revealed the existence of her secret weapon. It was video footage of Shane's abuse, secretly filmed over several months on her old smartphone. It captured countless acts of violence in places he thought were camera blind spots. The audio recorded his vile curses and the desperate cries of the animals with horrifying clarity. Furthermore, she had kept a detailed diary: which animal was abused, what injuries they sustained, what happened to them afterwards. She noted suspicious drug use and falsified euthanasia records. For one person, it was an astonishingly systematic and undeniable mountain of evidence. I was so scared, Chloe told the investigators, her voice trembling but clear. But when I saw Dr. Thompson fighting all by herself, I knew I couldn't just run away anymore. Her small frame seemed to radiate an immense strength. Inside the shelter, Everything was being seized. Computer hard drives, files from cabinets, logs from the medicine storage. Davies was bombarded with harsh questions from both the auditors and the police. The suspicious loss of complaint forms, the falsification of euthanasia records, and the convenient disappearance of security footage right after incidents of abuse. His stuttering, pathetic excuses fell on deaf ears. The news of the raid spread like wildfire through the local media. TV news crews surrounded the shelter. And suddenly, former staff and volunteers started coming forward with their own stories. This wasn't the act of one rogue employee. It was the result of a deep-seated, systemic corruption that had been going on for years. Dozens of animals had been abused, and many had been unnecessarily euthanized based on falsified behavioral assessments. Shelter funds had been misappropriated. Staff members who had tried to raise concerns internally had been systematically intimidated and harassed. The mask of the Hawkesbury Valley Animal Shelter as a sanctuary was torn away, and the ugly truth hidden beneath was exposed for all to see. From her apartment, Clara stared at the breaking news on her TV. Beside her, Shadow was sitting quietly, looking up at her face with a concerned expression, as if he understood everything that was happening. Clara gently stroked his head. "Look, Shadow, things might finally change. You, and all the others who suffered without a voice. Maybe you'll never have to go through that again." Just then, her phone rang. The screen showed an unknown number. She answered cautiously. A calm but firm woman's voice spoke. "Am I speaking with Dr. Clara Thompson? My name is Rachel Vance. I'm from the Department of Health and Community Welfare. In light of recent events, I have been appointed as the interim director of the Hawkesbury Valley Animal Shelter." The woman, Rachel, got straight to the point. "Dr. Thompson, regarding the cattle dog, Shadow, who is currently in your care, I have just finished consulting with the relevant parties. We have reviewed his case file, and I'm calling to inform you of the outcome." Clara held her breath, waiting for the next words. The 2-week deadline still had a few days left, but in all this chaos, there was no guarantee the agreement would be honored. Rachel's voice was clear and decisive. "As of today, the euthanasia order for Shadow has been officially and permanently revoked." "Are you serious?" Clara couldn't believe her ears. On the other end of the line, Rachel Vance repeated calmly, "Yes, officially revoked. We have determined that the entire previous assessment process was fundamentally compromised." "Dr. Thompson, you saved him. Thank you, from the bottom of my heart." The moment she heard those words, tears burst from Clara's eyes. Relief, joy, and gratitude for Shadow, who had fought so hard alongside her. A flood of emotions washed over her, and she couldn't form any words. All she could do was repeat, thank you, over and over. Beside her, Shadow sensed her emotion and let out a soft whine, gently pressing his head against her hand, as if to say, "It's okay, you don't have to cry anymore." Clara hugged him tightly. This warm, living creature would not be unjustly stolen from the world. That fact was the most wonderful thing of all. Rachel went on to speak of her determination to implement drastic reforms at the shelter. "First, we will be re-evaluating the health and behavior of every single animal. With the help of an external team of experts. We are also fast-tracking mandatory retraining for all staff and establishing a new anonymous whistleblower system. Dr. Thompson, when things have settled down, I was hoping we could count on your cooperation with these reforms. We need your help." "Yes, of course, anything I can do," Clara answered with conviction. This wasn't the end, this was the beginning of a true recovery. After hanging up, Clara sat there for a long time, just holding Shadow. Outside her window, the afternoon was deceptively calm. With the threat of euthanasia lifted, a huge weight was gone from Clara's shoulders. Perhaps Shadow sensed this too, because his progress became even more remarkable. He barely spent any time hiding in the bathroom anymore. His new default spot was near the sofa in the living room. When Clara was working on her laptop, he would often fall asleep peacefully at her feet. Then, a few days after the raid, on an ordinary afternoon, while Clara was working, Shadow suddenly stood up and started pacing around the room. And then he did something astonishing. He walked to the front door, sat down neatly, and looked back at Clara with expectant eyes. His tail gave a small, but definite, wag. Clara couldn't believe what she was seeing. "Shadow, do you want to go outside?" In response to her incredulous question, he let out a short, sharp woof, the first time he had properly barked since coming to her home. It wasn't a bark of fear or aggression. It was a clear, unmistakable demand, full of joy and anticipation. "You really want to go for a walk?" He answered by wagging his tail again. Clara's heart swelled with emotion. The dog who had rejected the entire outside world because of his trauma was now, of his own free will, asking to step out into it. This was the clearest sign yet that he was overcoming his past and starting to walk towards the future. Clara quickly got his lead and harness, speaking to him in a soft, gentle voice so as not to spook him. She fitted it on him. He stiffened slightly but didn't try to run away. She opened the apartment door and they walked down the stairs. Shadow's steps were still a little hesitant, and his ears twitched at every sound from the street. But he didn't descend into panic like before. His eyes were bright, sparkling with curiosity at everything he saw, the smells on the pavement, the leaves rustling in the wind, the birds flying overhead. They walked slowly to a small neighborhood park. The late afternoon sun cast a warm, gentle glow over everything. Shadow sniffed enthusiastically at the grass, trotting around happily, looking at him now. It was impossible to believe this was the same dog who had been cowering in despair behind steel bars just a few weeks ago. Clara sat on a bench, holding the lead loosely, watching him explore. It was a perfectly happy moment. I wish we could have peaceful days like this forever, she thought. Suddenly, she felt a pair of eyes on her from the park entrance. A man was standing in the shadow of a large gum tree. He was wearing a cap pulled down low, so she couldn't see his face clearly. But she knew, with a chilling certainty, that he was staring right at them. A shiver went down her spine. Was it one of Shane's cronies? Someone from the shelter who had lost their job? As soon as their eyes met, the man abruptly turned his head and walked away from the park. Maybe it was just her imagination, but a small, unshakable shadow of unease fell over Clara's heart. This fight might not be completely over yet. After the incident at the park, Clara changed her walking routes and remained vigilant. Fortunately, she never saw the shadowy figure again, but a lingering sense of anxiety remained. Meanwhile, the police investigation was making steady progress. Shane Bullock, who had been on the run, was arrested a few days later, found hiding out interstate. His confession, combined with the seized evidence and testimonies from numerous other staff, revealed the full, ugly extent of the shelter's corruption. Amidst all this, Clara received another call from Detective Hogan. "Dr. Thompson, we've found something remarkable about your dog." Hogan's voice sounded slightly excited. "While going through the seized records, we found the original intake information from before he arrived at Hawkesbury. It turns out he was first picked up as a stray by police in a different shire. And he was microchipped." "A microchip?" Clara was stunned. "But then, his owner should have been found straight away." "Exactly, but in the Hawkesbury shelter's records, his microchip was listed as unreadable. It can only have been deliberate. Our theory is that Shane, who was involved in the illegal dog trade, saw a valuable purebred cattle dog and falsified the records so he could sell him off later." Clara's body trembled with rage. Shadow had been a beloved family member. Shane's selfish greed had torn that family apart. So, his real owner. We scanned the chip information and got an immediate match. His real name is Rusty. His owner was a Mr. Kevin Mitchell, an ex-Army veteran who passed away a year and a half ago. Rusty. Clara whispered the name softly. At her feet, the dog formerly known as Shadow, who had been dozing, pricked up his ears as if recognizing the sound. Hogan continued. Mr. Mitchell was medically discharged early after suffering from PTSD due to his service. Rusty was his partner, his sole companion, the one who supported him. But nearly 2 years ago, while they were out on a walk, Rusty was apparently stolen. Mr. Mitchell searched desperately for him, but he passed away from a heart condition before he could find him. It was a heartbreaking story. Clara could only imagine the depth of Kevin Mitchell's despair at losing Rusty, and the suffering Rusty had endured. Separated from his owner and thrown into a living hell, she gently stroked the sleeping dog's back. "We've contacted Mr. Mitchell's next of kin. He has a daughter who has been searching for Rusty ever since her father passed away. She wants to meet him. What would you like to do?" Hogan's question sent Clara's heart into turmoil. Of course, she had to let him meet. Rusty belonged to that family. Her head knew that was the right thing to do, but her heart couldn't accept it. This dog, who had finally opened his heart and learned to trust her, did she have to give him up now? All the moments they had shared flashed through her mind like a movie: their first meeting, the terrifying night of the storm, the break-in, the joy of his first real walk. He wasn't just a foster dog to her anymore. He had become an irreplaceable part of her family. "Dr. Thompson?" Hogan's voice brought her back to reality. Clara suppressed her own selfish feelings and forced the words out. "Yes, of course. They have to meet. It's what's best for Rusty." After hanging up, she couldn't move for a long time. She felt a huge, gaping hole in her chest. Rusty has to go back to his real family. It's the right thing to do. She told herself this over and over, but she couldn't stop the tears from falling. A few days later, the day came to meet the owner's daughter, Sarah Mitchell. The meeting spot was that same park near Clara's apartment. Sarah was a kind-looking woman who had her father's gentle eyes. As soon as she saw Clara, she bowed her head deeply. Thank you so much for everything. If you hadn't saved him, we would never have seen Rusty again." Her eyes were already glistening with tears. Clara brought Rusty forward. He was a little wary of the stranger, trying to hide behind Clara's legs. "Rusty," Sarah called his name, her voice choked with emotion. But 2 years was a long time, and the trauma he had endured had perhaps clouded his memory. He just stared at her, showing no sign of recognition. A look of disappointment crossed Sarah's face, and Clara's own heart ached. What if he can't remember? Just then, Sarah took off a necklace she was wearing. Attached to it was an old, worn military-style dog tag. "This was my dad's," she explained. "Rusty always loved to play with it, to hold it in his mouth." She knelt down and gently held the dog tag out towards Rusty's nose. The reunion with Rusty had taken place a few weeks ago. Now, Clara was visiting the reborn Hawkesbury Valley Animal Shelter, under the leadership of the interim director, Rachel Vance. The facility was transforming at an incredible speed. The stagnant, oppressive air was gone, replaced by a bright, clean atmosphere. The walls were now covered with clear protocols on animal welfare and a staff code of conduct. And in every corner, new security cameras had been installed, eliminating the blind spots that had allowed the corruption to fester. "Dr. Thompson, it's so good to see you." Rachel greeted her with a warm smile. For a former council bureaucrat, she had thrown herself into the hands-on work with incredible passion. "These changes are just the beginning," Rachel explained, guiding Clara through the newly refurbished kennel area. "We've introduced mandatory training for all staff on early detection and reporting of abuse. We've set up an anonymous internal reporting line managed by professional counselors. And we're in the process of establishing a third-party oversight committee made up of community representatives." They stopped in front of the grim isolation block where Rusty had once been imprisoned. Now, a friendly old Labrador was snoozing peacefully in the sunlit space. The dark, cold place of despair had been transformed into a place of peace. "How is Rusty doing?" Rachel asked. "He's making a more wonderful recovery than anyone could have hoped for," Clara replied with a soft smile, thinking back to the day of his reunion with Sarah. "The specialists believe a full rehabilitation is possible, though the memories of his trauma will probably never completely fade." Clara wasn't just visiting the shelter for a tour that day. At Rachel's request, a meeting was being held with a team of experts to discuss how Rusty's case could inform the future operation of the shelter. The meeting room was filled with an impressive group of people: the city's chief veterinarian, a dog trainer specializing in trauma, and representatives from other animal welfare organizations. It was a thorough and transparent approach that would have been unthinkable under the old management. The focus of the meeting was the detailed rehabilitation log Clara had kept for Rusty. Her comprehensive diary and daily video footage were an unprecedented and invaluable resource, showing exactly how a dog with severe trauma had regained its trust in humans. "This documentation is phenomenal," said Dr. Kenji Mochizuki, the elderly animal behaviorist leading the team. "It shows the subtle workings of an animal's mind in a way textbooks never can. Your handling of him during the storm, Dr. Thompson, is a textbook example of the ideal approach to a traumatized animal." Based on Clara's records, the team began to draft a new behavioral assessment program. It wasn't about simply labeling a dog's reaction as aggressive or timid. The goal was to understand the underlying emotions, the fear and anxiety, behind the behavior, and to create a tailored, compassionate rehabilitation plan for each individual animal. "We would like to request your permission to use Rusty's case, anonymized of course, as a training resource for our staff," Dr. Mochizuki proposed to Clara. "His story will help change the entire industry's mindset towards animals with trauma." Clara gladly accepted the proposal. The suffering Rusty had endured would now become a beacon of hope, helping to save countless other animals. There was nothing more wonderful than that. On her way home from the shelter, Clara's mind was filled with a sense of bright possibility she couldn't have imagined just a few weeks ago. The criminal trial against Shane Bullock and Greg Davies was proceeding smoothly, with new evidence and testimonies emerging constantly. Under Rachel's leadership, the shelter was overcoming its past mistakes and truly becoming a place for the animals. And most importantly, Rusty and so many other animals who had been in danger had been given a second chance. When she got back to her apartment, Rusty was waiting at the door, wagging his tail. This had become their new normal. But there was still one unanswered question in Clara's heart. Should Rusty return to his original family with Sarah? Or should he walk a new path with her? What had happened that day in the park, after she had left them? The answer to that question would determine Rusty's future. The story rewinds a few weeks. To the park at sunset. Sarah Mitchell gently holds out her father's old dog tag to Rusty's nose. At first, Rusty was confused by the cold metal and the unfamiliar scent. He took a step back, his eyes darting between the kind woman in front of him and Clara, his trusted guardian, standing beside him. It was as if fragmented pieces of lost memories were desperately trying to form a coherent picture in his mind. A look of resignation began to cloud Sarah's face. Perhaps 2 years had simply been too long. Rusty, you don't remember, do you? Her voice trembled in the evening breeze. Just then, Sarah gently opened her hand, which had been clenched around the tag. The metal tag made a soft clinking sound and caught the last rays of the setting sun, flashing brightly. That sound, and that flash of light, was the trigger. Rusty's body went rigid, as if struck by lightning. His eyes widened. Deep within them, Clara could almost hear the sound of a long locked door creaking open. A flood of memories must have rushed back to him. The feel of a large, kind hand stroking his head. The scent of his favorite person. The sound of that familiar voice calling his name. Rusty, let's go, mate, accompanied by the jingle of this very tag. And then, the last day, being violently grabbed by rough hands, thrown into a car, and torn away from everything he loved. Joy, sorrow, confusion, a torrent of emotions surged through him. Woof! Rusty let out a soft, questioning cry. It was a sound Clara had never heard before. A vulnerable, almost puppy-like whimper. Rusty! Sarah cried his name through her tears. In the next instant, Rusty moved, as if a dam had broken. He lunged towards Sarah. He didn't just jump on her, he showered her face with licks. Whining with pure, unadulterated joy, it was the cry of a soul finally reunited with its beloved family after a long, painful separation. Oh, Rusty, you do remember. Sarah hugged his body tightly, sobbing openly. The two of them were lost in their own world, a world that consisted only of one person and one dog. Reunited at last. Clara watched from a short distance, a lump forming in her throat. This is good, this is really, really good, she told herself. She was genuinely happy for them. But at the same time, she couldn't stop the overwhelming feeling of sadness that welled up from deep inside her. My job is done. Rusty is going back to where he belongs. This is for the best. Fighting back tears, Clara started to turn away. Dr. Thompson. Sarah's voice made her turn back. Sarah's face was wet with tears, but her eyes held a new determination. I have a favor to ask. Could you let me tell you about my father's dream? Stroking Rusty gently, Sarah began to speak slowly. My dad carried deep scars from his time in the army. For him, Rusty wasn't just a pet. He was his comrade, the only soul he could truly open up to. She explained that as her father, Kevin, spent time with Rusty, he slowly began to find peace. And eventually, he started talking about a dream he had. Dad's dream was to one day, with Rusty, help other people who were suffering from invisible wounds like his. He knew firsthand how much healing power a wonderful dog like Rusty possessed. He always said he was going to train Rusty to be a therapy dog. But that dream was stolen from him the day Rusty was taken. Sarah paused, then looked directly into Clara's eyes. Dr. Thompson, you are Rusty's savior, and you performed a miracle that even my father couldn't achieve. You healed Rusty's broken heart. So, I'm asking you, could I entrust my father's dream to you? Would you be willing to raise Rusty as a therapy dog, in my father's place? It was the most unexpected proposal Clara could have ever imagined. Sarah's offer resonated deeply and warmly in Clara's heart. The relief of not having to give up Rusty, combined with a new sense of purpose from inheriting his former owner's dream. With tears in her eyes, Clara humbly accepted the offer. If you think I'm worthy, yes, I would be honored. I want to help Rusty fulfill your father's dream. Sarah officially transferred ownership of Rusty to Clara, promising to be his favorite auntie and visit him whenever she could. And so, Rusty officially, and for all time, became a part of Clara's family. In the months that followed, the world changed at a dizzying pace. But for the better. The trial for the incidents at the Hawkesbury Valley Animal Shelter concluded. The main culprit, Shane Bullock, was found guilty of animal cruelty, breaking and entering, and intimidation, and was sentenced to 2 years in prison. Greg Davies, the former director who had covered up the abuse, along with several other staff members, received suspended sentences and were ordered to perform community service. The case became a major catalyst for reviewing the operations of animal shelters nationwide, leading to a movement to create new legislation to strengthen oversight. At the shelter, Rachel Vance was officially appointed as the permanent director. Thanks to her thorough reforms, the shelter's euthanasia rate dropped by an incredible 62%, and staff turnover improved dramatically. The transparent management style restored the community's trust, and donations and volunteer applications surged. Clara also continued to contribute as an advisor, securing a grant to launch a specialized rehabilitation program for animals with behavioral issues. And Rusty, he began to display his natural talent as a therapy dog with astonishing speed. With guidance from Professor Reed and other experts, Clara began his formal training. Because of his own trauma, he was uniquely sensitive to the subtle shifts in human emotions. When someone was sad or anxious, Rusty would instinctively move closer, offering his warm, solid presence as a silent comfort. His calm, intelligent, and deeply gentle eyes had a healing effect on many people. Clara and Rusty's new mission took them beyond vet clinics and shelters. Once a week, they began visiting a special place, a rehabilitation center for people recovering from trauma, including ex-service members, accident survivors, and first responders. The day Rusty was certified as a therapy dog and was about to begin his first official session, Clara felt a little nervous. "Ah, our favorite team has arrived." Dr. Keiko Morishita, the clinical psychologist who ran the center, greeted them with a smile. "Clara, there's someone special I'd like Rusty to meet today. It might be a challenging case, though." Dr. Morishita led them to a quiet private room with a sunny view of a peaceful courtyard. Inside, a young man was sitting in a wheelchair, staring blankly out the window. He was a former soldier, suffering from severe PTSD after an experience during his deployment overseas. He had fallen into a deep distrust of people and hadn't spoken a word to anyone in weeks. Completely withdrawn into his own shell. "Liam," Dr. Morishita said gently, "this is Dr. Thompson and her partner, Rusty." The young man, Liam, slowly turned his head. His eyes were vacant, as if all emotion had been drained from them. But the moment he saw Rusty, Clara saw a tiny flicker of light in their depths. Clara gave Rusty no commands. She simply loosened the lead and trusted his judgment. Rusty observed Liam for a few seconds, as if sensing the deep sadness and loneliness emanating from him. Then, with slow, deliberate steps, he approached Liam. He sat down quietly beside the wheelchair and gently rested his head on the young man's lap. It was a simple, warm gesture, with no demands or force. It just said, "I am here with you." Liam looked down in surprise at the warm weight on his knees. His fingers twitched. This dog, was he a military dog? It was the first sentence he had spoken in weeks. In response to Liam's strained question, Clara shook her head gently. "No, he wasn't, but he understands trauma better than anyone. He's fought his own long, hard war." Her words seemed to strike a chord with Liam. The guarded expression on his face softened for the first time. A hesitant hand reached out and gently stroked Rusty's head. Rusty closed his eyes, clearly enjoying the touch, and leaned his head further into Liam's lap. "I see," Liam whispered, "so you've been in a fight too, mate." In that moment, Clara knew that a small crack had appeared in the wall around his heart. The presence of another being who understood his pain, right here, right now, had cast a single ray of light into his lonely world. From then on, the weekly visits became a cherished routine. Liam only spoke during his time with Rusty, but slowly, he began to open up. He started telling Rusty things he had never been able to tell anyone else. Speaking of his experiences overseas in quiet, fragmented sentences, Rusty would just listen silently, never judging, never flinching, simply accepting everything with his warm presence. For Liam, this was more effective than any counseling session. One sunny afternoon, when Clara and Rusty arrived at the center, they found Liam in the courtyard, sketching in a notebook. "Hi, Liam," Clara said. He looked up and gave her a shy smile. It was the first genuine smile she had ever seen on his face. "Check it out, I tried to draw him," he said. The sketchbook held a pencil drawing of Rusty. It wasn't photorealistic, but it captured his intelligence and gentleness with incredible life and energy. "Wow, that's amazing, Liam. I used to draw a bit. A long time ago. Seeing him, it just made me want to draw again," he said, gently scratching Rusty behind the ears. "Hey, Rusty, I've decided I'm going to start my physio again. Properly. I want to be able to walk with you in this courtyard one day." Hearing those words, Clara's heart felt full. A young man who had been at the edge of despair was now talking about his own hopes for the future. Rusty had given him that. This dog, once abused at a puppy farm, kicked by a shelter worker, and moments from being euthanized. A dog who had lost all faith in humanity was now a beacon of hope, saving the heart of a human who had been similarly wounded. The story doesn't end there. Word of Rusty's gift spread, and he became a beloved figure in many places. He helped comfort children affected by natural disasters and brought joy to residents in nursing homes. Everywhere he went, his calm presence lit a warm flame in people's hearts. Clara also continued to grow. As a vet and as Rusty's partner, she made the rehabilitation program at the Hawkesbury Valley Shelter a resounding success and worked to expand its methods to shelters all over the country. Her passion inspired many people, and the landscape of animal welfare in Australia began to change, slowly but surely. Sitting on a park bench, bathed in the light of the setting sun, Clara stroked the back of Rusty, who was lying peacefully beside her. In front of them, she could see Liam, slowly practicing walking on his own 2 feet, with Sarah Mitchell by his side, supporting him. The two had met through Rusty and were now a source of strength for each other. It was a happy scene. Clara looked up at the sky. If, on that night, she had looked away from Shane's abuse, if she had given up when the euthanasia order was signed, she would never have seen this beautiful sight. One small act of courage had created a chain reaction, changing so many lives and futures. Rusty lifted his head and looked intently at Clara's face. His deep, amber eyes seemed to be saying, thank you for finding me." Clara smiled back and gently kissed his forehead. "No," she whispered, "thank you, you're the one who taught me that no matter how deep the darkness, a light will always shine through, and that even from the edge of despair, we can always get back up. When we stand up against cruelty and give a wounded animal the chance to heal, they don't just enrich their own lives, they enrich and empower ours." The miracle started by one blue healer would continue to be told. A story of hope in the hearts of many, for a long time to come.